Without further ado, I wanted to hand it back to Steve for him to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Abby. Hi, how's everybody doing? Excellent. Thank you very much for being here. Traffic around this area is so much fun at 5:30, 6 o'clock, isn't it? It's incredible. And you know, we don't spend any money on transportation in this town, so it's great. Hi, Steve Brummer. I'm a partner of BH IoT Group. It's a company we just started about 10 months ago. We used to be 151 advisors. We are basically a company that spends most of the time helping clients around the world trying to make money in the IoT space. I know it's sometimes an oxymoron, but how many people in the room are actually making profitable money in the IoT space today? Well, if I would have asked you that a year ago, no one would have raised their hand. And it's getting better, but there's a lot of other people that are not figuring out how to commercialize and monetize products, and that's probably the most important thing right now, because we can all spend money on technology, but if we're not figuring out how our clients are going to make money using that technology, we're kind of wasting our time. And so that's what we're going to try and discuss most of the time tonight. So the forum has asked us to put together a panel that looks at deploying end-to-end solutions. Sometimes that's the most difficult thing. There's two big holes that I see in the industry, and I'm around the world speaking. Last year I've already spoken 15 times this year in IoT around the world, and there's two big holes missing. One is education, which is why I commend you for all being here, because we all need to not only educate ourselves, but vendors, people within the industry and the ecosystem, our clients, and our students. And if anybody was at the Georgia Tech event a while ago, I said something that was very poignant. How many of us go to a STEM school and talk about technology to the students, or IoT? It's amazing when you go to some of these classes and you're talking to even master's degree students and they don't know what IoT is or how it works. Half of them don't even know how a cell phone works. Well, I don't know how many of you do, but if you take your cell phone out, do you know how it answers at your grandmother's house on the wall? Those are the kind of things that we talk about. So getting end-to-end solutions to better understand is what it's all about. And that's what we're going to talk about today with three amazing panelists. And they're going to take a couple minutes to introduce themselves, their company, and provide some of their wisdom on what they're doing around end-to-end solutions and deploying those things. And then I have the questions, not Slido. I have the questions, and then we'll go from there. All right? And we're going to be very interactive. I already told these guys we're going to be bantering back and forth and seeing what happens from there. So, Joe, it's yours.
Yeah, I'm Joe Conway. I'm the founder and CEO of Stable Kernel. We build software solutions in the IoT space. So everything that's happening from when those devices connect to some sort of relay or gateway, make their way into the cloud. We store that data, we process and analyze that data, we run machine learning on that data, and then we present that information through different applications targeted at the right type of person who wants to have insight from that data. Yeah, that's it.
All right. It's easy. Your phone, it's not on.
My name is Mariano Maluf. I work at Kimberly-Clark Corporation as a Global Director of Digital Innovation and Smart Products. I've been there for a short time, but before that I spent time at NCR, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, a couple of startups and other places like that, including Bell South, now AT&T. Who doesn't know who Kimberly-Clark is? All right, great. So, it's your question. Kimberly-Clark is a house of brands, so if you've used Kleenex or Kotex or any of those products, Scott's paper towel or toilet paper, that's who Kimberly-Clark is. As we touch about 1/4 of the population of this planet with our products that are designed to either contain or dispose every fluid known to humans. That's one way to look at the company. But we also have a B2B arm. Yeah, someone is thanking me for that thought. We also have a B2B arm called Kimberly-Clark Professional, and I'm going to center some of the answers to some of the great questions that Steve has around that business unit. But my responsibility goes across the business, not only in the B2B arm of the company, but also in the consumer space, in which IoT, in my opinion, is still very, very much an immature technology.
Hello? Hey, awesome. So I'm Sean Purdy. I'm Business Development Director for Creation Technologies, who is a global contract manufacturer. So we design and build complex products for OEMs, which is, typically very large companies in medical, industrial, instrumentation products, non-automotive transportation. So my role within Creation is I work for the Design Services Center. So we have electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, software engineers, test engineers. So I look to help our customers with any engineering service to actually get their product to market. And as you might know, one of our big pushes is IoT products. We deal with a lot of old brand name OEMs. They are just dipping their toe into the water on IoT, and they don't know everything. They make a lot of the same mistakes that even single person startups do. So my role is to really help them get on the right track, provide them assistance where they need to, and then hook them up with other software services partners to provide a complete solution. And as we go through the panel talk, that'll be one of the underlying themes of my talk is, deal with an ecosystem, not just a single partner, engage with each other. People have made a lot of mistakes in this market, learn from each other, and you'll end up with a much better solution when you finally get done.
So we want to know a little bit about you. So how many people here have never heard about IoT or don't know a lot about IoT? Great. So we assumed that most of you knew what it was. So if you look at what we're going to be talking about tonight, that was our assumption. So how many people are considered vendors in the room? How many are in the software space? How many people are in the hardware space? How many systems integrators are there in the room? Okay. So when we look at end-to-end solutions today, this stuff is still hard. I mean, I know there's companies that sell IoT in a box, but as I said to the chairman of that company last week in California, that's crap. Because there's no such thing today, in my opinion, that there's IoT in a box. And to deploy an end-to-end solution includes a lot of things, from sensors to modems to software to gateways to the cloud to the platform to the integration that's going on to data analytics to security. It's a very complicated spot. And that makes us all have great opportunities as people within the industry to provide our clients with solutions to their problems. That's what we're trying to do with IoT. And it's when you talk to some of these people, you go, listen, IoT is a very simple thing. It's if-then statements. If the temperature rises, then the fan gets turned on after the software and the application told it to do that. It's a very simple thing. But we got to solve our customers' problems. And so there's a lot of challenges that go on in our industry in trying to explain to our customers what we're trying to accomplish by using IoT. So the first question, Joe, is, did you think you were just going to sit here and I was going to talk the whole time?
I figured it was coming. I knew, Steve, I knew you were going to get me.
So the biggest thing is, how do you determine an IoT opportunity within a client? What do you ask them what the problem is that you're trying to solve?
Sometimes we ask. Sometimes we go searching for their problems, right? If you really think about IoT, it's just glorified data collection, right? And once you have data, then your platform looks the same as if it was accounting data, if it was any other type of data, right? There's just ways for us to now capture this data more effectively. And so if you're looking at a solution, or if you're looking at a customer's existing products is a good way to start, I think, right? And you say, how are people using those products today? How can I make it better? How could I make it better by making it more automated? How could I make it better by providing some sort of insight that's going to change their behavior? How can I continue to collect metrics about those changes in their behavior that are going to help them in the future? Those are the types of things you want to think about. And the position that we sit at in the market is that we sell through a big company that has an existing sales channel. They're already selling products. And we find ways to make those products better through connectivity. And that's generally what we're at.
And the same thing with you, from Kimberly-Clark's standpoint. Are you finding challenges and problems and things that you have to find IoT solutions for bubbling up through the teams underneath you?
Yeah, all the time, all the time. We have a number of ideas that come from the business directly, and that's one way of what I call problem sourcing, to do problem sourcing on our innovation pipeline, in which IoT is one of the top five strategic technologies that we're looking at right now. On the other hand, we also talk to peers of ours and providers and trusted partners, and then we, in that case, in my team, we go to the business with some ideas of what could be done with technology. And so this back and forth that provides some fruitful outcomes, and then we go pursue them.
And so, Sean, as you go through the hardware piece that you're involved in as a contract manufacturer, we come to you when we're trying to figure out exactly what the end user needs in those programs. And so there is various problems and solutions that you have to solve for them. How do you go through that?
So typically, by the time you get to us, hopefully you're not starting with hardware. Hopefully you've developed your business case, you've figured out your software, you've done a soft simulation just in software, so you really know the requirements. Hardware is the least flexible component of your whole solution. We talk about agile and iterate and deploy constantly. Hardware, can be hard and not just to develop, but financially painful. There's nothing like tooling some plastic, spending $50,000 just to find out it doesn't quite fit, or it doesn't quite work right, or it doesn't seal properly. So my advice to everybody is make sure that you bring good requirements to the hardware process, because your iteration cycle is not daily, and it can be painful, not only just from the non-recurring costs, but the time to market. And that's where we actually see a lot of our customers fail. They have business models that depend on delivering a product within a certain time frame, and because the hardware took longer than possible, they failed in their business case.
What's interesting, something that popped in my mind there, which is that concept of having your software in place first. It makes a ton of sense, right? Because what I was saying earlier, where we're just glorified data collectors, right? The hardware is just glorified data collectors. That means that I can build an entire software solution as it will exist in the market without ever even having the hardware, because I can emulate that data as though it were coming from those devices. So I can build out my customer-facing version of whatever I'm trying to build, and then later on go say, all right, now let's build the hardware. Now, you probably want to be thinking about it beforehand, because again, it's not only costly to produce that hardware, to manufacture it, but it's also very costly to deploy it in a lot of scenarios as well.
So as I said to all of you on the phone, you'll get trick questions for me. So the first one's for you, Sean, as it relates to the hardware. Many of I have a lot of clients in China and a lot of in Asia, and actually Vietnam too. And obviously the tariff issue is approaching. I'm going to Lithuania in 2 weeks to a manufacturer of fleet products. The 15% tariff seems to be a big issue. How are you addressing it, being a contract manufacturer in South Carolina, to balance out the issues that we're having with IoT products coming in from China?
Sure. So
good trick question, right?
that was perfect. That was just like we rehearsed it. So as a global contract manufacturer, we have facilities in North America, so Canada, US, Mexico, and China. And really, there's trade regulations throughout the world. So as we use our global supply chain, we can move products around, pick different components from different areas of the region, move the products around to minimize the tariff impact. We've been very successful, minimizing those tariff impacts to single-digit percentages. If you work with a partner that has that flexibility, it's great. If you have a single source ODM in China, and that is your only lifeline to your product, then you don't have many options. But don't forget about the rest of the world. It's not just electronics in China anymore. There's, for low-cost regions, there's the Philippines, there's Thailand, there's Vietnam, there's low-cost regions in Eastern Europe. So definitely check with your partners, figure out what your options are, and just be prepared to adjust as necessary. Don't be reliant on a single source.
And don't rely on a single source for your communication modules and all the other things that are there, because this stuff works worldwide. whether it's going NB-IoT or CAD-M or M1 or LoRa and low power wide area, it's everywhere. So that's, you have to worry about that. You have to look at it.
So one more thing is, you know, custom hardware is very expensive. So even though we do custom hardware, you should always try to look for, especially when you're starting out, try to find a off-the-shelf component or something that can be easily customized for your first generation. And work with more than one partner so you always have a backup, especially when you're just starting. As you get to version 2, 3, and 4, a company like Creation Technologies can really iterate and optimize and really drive the cost of your device really low as you scale. But definitely do a lot of risk mitigation with your partners in the beginning.
Mariano, one of the questions I had for you was around IoT's value within an organization. Several of my Fortune 500 companies that I have as clients, the hardest part is trying to get the education out to them and understanding what IoT and what the value of IoT is to solving the problem or within the organization. How do you deal with that? Is it all about efficiency and productivity gains? Is it a money issue? Is there an ROI issue that you have to address all the time?
I think it starts with the efficiencies, right? With that piece, that's the most obvious piece to go after. But I think it goes beyond that. It has to. So for our B2B business unit for Kimberly-Clark Professional, we sell this toilet paper dispensers and paper towel dispensers and a few other things. And you may have seen them in high-rise, high-density buildings. They are not available for now in like a restaurant or a place like that. So there's definitely an ROI there that was detected as part of the business model research before we even got into the product and the manufacturing. An interesting point to make here is that we already had a device, right? So from a hardware standpoint, when you're instrumenting something that already exists, you have to make a lot of decisions, right? And so I absolutely agree with your point about going low fidelity, cheap, off the shelf. But at some point when you're transitioning towards scale and personalization and customization, you have to make those hard decisions of how do you do it. It's different when you're instrumenting something that people don't touch, where you have more flexibility with the housing and all those things. But so there was a very clear value proposition on the B2B side for us, because we were already serving customers, and we could articulate a number of business use cases around that with the glorified data collection. What else can we do? Well, let's start with the obvious things. help our customers do more with less, optimize the routes for the cleaning stuff, and so on and so forth. But on the consumer side, it's less clear, right? And we absolutely are all about getting first-party data, which is how do we get to know our customers, our consumers, more. And so the articulation to an IoT-based solution is less clear for now. We have a lot of different explorations and ideas and thoughts, but we haven't really cracked the nut yet. And that's part of my team's job, is to figure that out. But it's absolutely imperative that we have an ROI and a business case before we even start toying around with putting sensors on our products.
It definitely seems like the B2B space is the faster one to adopt. There's more to invest. It seems like there's a lot of really great scenarios where you can make a good chunk of money, right? And I feel like the consumer space is still, to your point, a little bit tough. And I think a lot of that problem stems from the fact of getting these devices connected in the first place, right? It's not like, with electricity, for example, I can just go plug something into a wall. I buy a toaster, I go plug it into a wall, it works, okay? There's not an ability to do that with IoT devices. What is it gonna connect to? If it's Bluetooth, it's gotta connect to something else that connects to the internet. I also have to have some concept of identity at that point, right? I have to say, I can't just connect this thing and it just automatically knows that I'm the one that can control it through my smartphone at that point. There has to be some association that occurs. And that's a very challenging thing right now. It's everyone's pain point. It's the part that we probably spend the most amount of time in an IoT solution, a software solution on, is how do we make that process of setting up the device that much more effective? In a B2B space, it doesn't matter. You hire a team to come in, of field service technicians, to go install it. Exactly, not a big deal. That type of ability is not something that all consumers have.
Yeah, I'll say if you have a B2B scenario, you already have a number of business processes that you can make more efficient, automate, right? Do a lot of productivity gains with technology. IoT and streaming analytics happens to be another thing that you can put in your toolbox. But then what's interesting is that once you start collecting this data, once you start getting intelligence around the environment and you start detecting potential new business use cases that you didn't have before, that's where I think it starts getting interesting. And then you move from the obvious productivity gains through technologies like IoT to, okay, we now have the ability, because we have these insights and we have the technology to instrument those insights even more, to create new business paths for the company to grow. And I think that's where we find ourselves now on the B2B arm, is having done this for a number of years. Now we're trying to do that next wave of business model growth.
But we still have an idea of trying to figure out who owns the data. And we're still going to run across...
California.
So I was thinking you were going to say Georgia Tech. But I think that you're right. The data is valuable. But eventually, as we continue, and don't take this wrong, Sean, as we continue to plummet to low-cost devices on the B2B side, module cost is going down dramatically, airtime going down dramatically, where is the money? And I believe that the money is going to be on that data and the farming of the data and the analytics that we get out of the data. So, Sean, how much time are you spending with clients on saying, I want to get that data, and how do I get it out of your products?
So we spend quite a bit of time on how they get the data out, right? Because at the end of the day, your hardware device is just the data provider, and we'll digest it up to some server, and then it's sort of off our books. Now, the problem is they get the data, they come up with a use case, they say, hey, I'd really like some more data. Is there a way you can make the device do more than I did before so I can gather more data because I've discovered a new use case? So a lot of the things we do is build in flexibility to our device designs. The really big driving force with the hardware is that like software, the software on the device continually changes as well, and it needs to adapt. Obviously, as a contract manufacturer, we convert material to products, and there's always cost pressures on that. Our experience has been while we get beat down on unit cost, and that's what you're supposed to do, don't forget about, do I need a trained technician to do that? Do I need a support staff? How am I going to support that product? What if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't connect to the network? Those items actually account for a much larger percentage of the total cost of your implementation than the unit cost. And being on my side, we get beat down on unit cost, but by the way, that battery that we give you, the slightly smaller capacity that you put on a tower overlooking Denver with a LoRaWAN that you had to pay a technician $250 an hour to hike up the mountain to change, yeah, you lost your $6 you saved on that battery. So really look at everything holistically, not just the unit price.
You stepped right into the next question in the sense of battery life and the life cycle of our products in the IoT space. I don't know how many people have been in the IoT or M2M business longer than 15, 20 years in the room. Not a lot of us. And yes, we didn't have any batteries back then, right? We had to plug this thing into a 12-volt battery in a truck and pray that it would last a week or a month. Today, with LoRaWAN and some of the NB-IoT scenarios, they're saying 7, 10, 12 years to go down the road. And that's a hell of a life cycle for us to have to manage from a software standpoint and firmware and upgrades, as well as what are you going to do when you have to go out and touch every product that's out there on a B2B side, and you would figuring out what that life cycle is, because the longer they last, the less they need you. So how do you handle life cycles within this industry?
Well, number one, make sure one of those data points you're collecting is the battery level.
That's a good point.
Because then I have a database full of all of the different sensors that are out there, and I can tell you exactly where they're at, right? But I think what's interesting right now, at least it seems this way, is that we look at this in 3 distinct phases when we build an IoT solution. There's our proof of concept, and we're trying to figure out, is this actually going to work? Then there's our MVP, which is like, can we actually make money from this? And then once you say, yeah, there's an investment opportunity here, then you get into this operationalization phase. And that's when you're really starting to think through those types of questions. You would think that you would think about those questions beforehand. But to be honest, we're not seeing a lot of people thinking about that right now. And I think it's because the cost of getting there and sort of the excitement of getting there and the race to get there, because there's a lot of really great solutions that are just out there untapped right now. I think it's one of those things where if you get it out there and it's making money, you can invest in solving that problem later.
So before I try to answer that, how many people here, of the people who didn't raise their hands, are end users or customers trying to deploy an IoT solution right now? 2, wow. Who is looking at deploying IoT solutions? All right, the rest of you are here for the free meal. Okay, got it. No, I just wanted to. Thank you, Joe. Just wanted to check. No, but I think the battery life is one of the many aspects that have to do with the hardware piece, and you're absolutely right. When we started, there was a lot of experimentation, and we'll deal with that later. We'll deal with that later. Later is now for us, as we are at the brink of expanding and doing scaling. So those decisions are proving to be very, very hard. And of course, on the business side, now we're making money, but we want to really, really make money, right? So that ROI equation becomes much more complex, and you have a lot of eyes from the executive team looking at the business model and the cost model. So every little component, when you talk about end-to-end, matters. As it matters, the staffing model and the support model that you're going to have, and then the ability to extract data and to analyze that data that you are not analyzing today because you're just solving for the productivity gains. Well, if you're going to expand to new business models, you need to staff for that. Otherwise, your investment doesn't. So it's a very complex model to go figure out. But we're looking at everything, end to end, holistically, from the hardware, the dispenser that we deployed 2 years ago, the one we're about to start deploying, et cetera, et cetera. And the picture keeps changing. So it's not like it's useless to look at battery life when you're doing MVPs, because you learn a lot. But by the time you're ready to do deployment in production, thing has changed so much. And then you have to go and look again at the power envelope. You have to look at the firmware. You have to also look at the intervals where you're collecting data. That may have made sense then. And so the power envelope calculation now is changing as well, because you're hopefully smarter about what you're collecting and how much more can you collect.
So what you're saying is you just got to continually design and manufacture new products all the time. That sounds great. So, but back to sort of the 7 to 10 year life. Clearly, battery technology can be critical in that. But the more important thing is not worrying so much about what you're going to do with the devices that you deploy 10 years from now. It's that you may have 3 or 4 different versions that you're supporting 10 years from now. So that can be a challenge in itself, and it just like you go through that with your Android and iPhone upgrades, the problems are even worse because the thinking has evolved, the requirements have evolved, and likely the team has changed over that period of time. So the tribal knowledge that was there when it was first developed is no longer there, and it's evolved. So
Or how many people have 2G and 3G deployed still here in the room? Sunsetting issues.
And I don't think it's just battery life that you have to think about in a long term, right? Because to the point that he was making earlier about your life cycle of developing new versions of hardware being quite long, you would rather do things in software as much as you can, right? And a lot of times you move a lot of processing as much as you can into software, and your connected devices are just simply very dumb data emitters. But there's sometimes that you need to collect different data, and that requires a change to the way that those devices are running. And that typically, or at least in the past, has meant a firmware update, which means that you actually have to shoot a new version of that code that's running on this down to this thing. It has to be smart enough to replace its current code that's doing this work, by the way, with the new code, restart itself, and then all of a sudden be back in this new mode. You can brick your entire fleet of devices by doing something like that, right? And that's a really scary and terrifying thing. There's a ton of work being done by a lot of different companies right now to move more into, if you guys are familiar with the software world, containerization, Docker, that type of stuff, it's a way of packaging up software applications so I can run them on a server in AWS or Google Cloud or Azure. we're working on, as an industry, the same concept of being able to deploy those Docker images or something similar to actual hardware, so that you're not doing firmware anymore. You're deploying little mini applications that don't disrupt the life cycle of these devices to these devices. And if they don't work, and they just fail and they stop, but the device itself keeps running. And that's gonna be a really big game changer, because you're gonna be able to push code at the same interval that we push out website code daily, right? You're just doing blue-green deployments all day.
So one of my questions, and a question from Anonymous in the audience, none of you want to use your name. I have all anonymous questions coming in. Was around security, and it was one of the questions for me that I had for you guys also. Software, end user, hardware. We have an issue with security. We don't have really a standard in the IoT space today. We're using an extremely wide variety of different models and methods. The LoRa people will tell you that it's encrypted from the module all the way to the gateway and through, and the carriers will say we have it handled. So tell me about security, and how important is it for our customers and your customers when deploying the end-to-end solution? Do they care? Are they asking about it?
Oh, they care.
What's going on?
They should care, right? Because if you're going to go out
care,
and you're going
but
to
are they?
scale at millions of devices, if your devices are the one that takes down some central DNS server to the internet and no one can connect to it, you're probably not going to hear the end of that, right? So security being very critical. Some of the biggest, most important things are, you're right, there isn't really necessarily a standard. And from a hardware perspective, I won't be able to speak to it all. It's not really an issue, right? Because at the end of the day, you're just encrypting traffic. And so as long as you have the ability to rotate credentials through a remote push, and you have the ability to blacklist devices, you should be in a pretty good spot to start, at least. I'm sure in 5 years, someone will pull back up this quote and be like, you're an idiot. They'll come up with some brand new way of doing this that I don't know about. But if you look at some of the major providers of IoT connectivity cloud solutions, so like Azure and Amazon, they have SLA protected services for connectivity, right? And they're gonna build that security into there, which at the end of the day is just device management and the ability to issue an asymmetric key to the device itself. And if that gets compromised in some way, it will reject all connections, or you can replace that key if you have physical access.
Yeah, I don't know, just fix it, guys.
That's what we're here for.
I'm the end user here. No, but you know, half jokingly, because we can't pass the buck to you or to Azure or AWS or our customers. If we're servicing a hotel, we're damaging their brand if they get a ransomware scenario. So I would say security is number one issue for us is a nightmare scenario where things get bricked or we get ransomware or anything like that. So we're paying a lot of attention, bringing a lot of SMEs around IoT. In fact, we just onboarded a resource to look at that just specifically for this one project. And we're working very, very closely with our great cybersecurity team, who's doing an amazing job on the rest of the enterprise systems to bring them also, but there's an education as well, because they haven't done IoT security, which is different than doing it for back-end systems, et cetera. So it's an absolutely top concern, and it's a nightmare scenario for me and my business stakeholders.
So just to sort of add on to that, are there any people that manage IT networks here? Wow, they must be busy doing their job. Oh, there was one.
I restarted my router recently.
The thing is, if you look at the corporate IT guys, they're monitoring your network all the time, right? They have very sophisticated tools, lots of processes in place. Well, a lot of IoT devices are custom, they're one-offs, there are no standard tools for analyzing security. So from a hardware-centric view, we look at, encryption, keys, management, secure environments, disabling physical access or tamper detection. So there's different layers of security you can add on. My number one thing is if you don't think about the holistic security end-to-end from the beginning, you won't get it. And one of the basic security hacks is if I reset the device, doing a hardware factory reset, does everybody know what the default password is? Or can I go to the chip developer's website, look at their manual and say, oh, to start it up, to get your quick start going, enter this code. You'd be surprised how often that's the way in on a device, no matter how many pieces of software you've written.
Yeah, so to to that point, do you have a kill switch strategy when you're doing device management selection, right? So these things, I mean, you have to think hard about these things and plan it accordingly. One scenario that we're looking at for the consumer side, and part of my job is to watch what the competition does. But I'm not a Me Too person, so I kind of hate doing that. But I have to. So P&G recently launched I'm advertising my competition? I am. They launched a smart nursery or smart baby nursery product, right? So it's public. And then I think the day after, a hacker posted an announcement saying, I'm gonna hack that, and that's gonna be insecure, and I'm gonna show how I can hack that. So when you're P&G or Kimberly-Clark or Johnson & Johnson, and you have this consumer reach of billions of people, you're immediately a target for these people that, their mission in life is to hack your system, right? Black hat hackers, right? So that immediately sent a wave of, oh, that's right? If we get into the consumer IoT space, how do we guard against that? And so if you are the brand owner of, say, Huggies, which even the name connotates a lot of emotion and care and lovable babies, et cetera, you're gonna become even more protective and more less tolerant to risk, right? Which is the opposite of innovation. So how can we? This is something I'm asking myself. It's a rhetorical question. Is that how do I provide the level of trust and ensure that when we are starting to experiment and deploy these solutions, we can point into something that is a success story on keeping something safe and secure, and not just the hack scenarios, but also the data privacy and data protection. So for the B2B space is less problematic, I think. It's not that it's not a problem. But when you think about billions of people, consumer level products in IoT, that becomes even more of a nightmare.
I'm going to stick with you for a second. An audience question. Predictive analytics, predictive maintenance, that kind of stuff. Are you heavily involved? Does that deal with the ROI? How much are you spending on it? Joe, you're doing a lot of that, obviously, on the back end.
We are, but I don't know how much I can say about it.
Oh, God.
So the answer is yes.
Sorry, question.
The answer is yes. I can talk to you offline on exactly what we're looking at, how we're looking at things, if that helps you, Anonymous 2 or 3. But who's not doing predictive analytics? I mean, predictive analytics is one of the key use cases for IoT, right? It's interesting because even when I was at NCR, when we were trying to instrument complex things like an ATM inside, it's a very complex piece of equipment. You don't really know all the things that you're going to end up capturing and quote unquote making money off of, right? So you put a bunch of sensors in, and then your cost goes up, right? And you're trying to do predictive analytics on the basics, but you really don't know how many things you have to sense and get data from. So there's this rapid iteration that you have to instill in the culture of, in this case, a very old engineering firm that's not used to that. So, but that's one of the key components. But we did predictive analytics there for the services organization to, again, same thing, right? You're doing this business process today. Can you make it better by capturing data here, and there? And can you do more than just alert? Can you do predictive, and can you get wisdom and insights? So again, the answer is yes, we're doing all of that. The question is for the B2B, can we do it beyond the obvious? Can we do it beyond solving the 1 or 2 problems that we're solving today for our customers very successfully, right? But can we do more? And that's the trick question, because you have to start, what else do I have to instrument, and how much of a cost increase am I going to incur in versus the ROI? So that's also a complex thing, and if you think that the technology piece is complex, you haven't heard anything yet, right? I mean, it's on the other side that the complexity really lies, I think. Convincing people to invest in this technology that everyone is talking about. So you have to have a position, you have to have a point of view. So some of the things that we do also on the consumer side is because we have to have an opinion, we have to have a position on whether or not IoT or streaming analytics are solutions. But that's my perspective on it.
It was interesting. I was trying to think through of like, what's a use case of predictive analytics, And I was thinking through all the ones that we have worked with and come up with. And they're things that I don't want to share because it seems like that's the actual value. You know what I mean? Connectivity, great, I can buy something off the shelf. It is, what are people coming up with? What are they predicting? What's the value of that data? That is actually the most critical business piece. So I don't feel comfortable sharing some very specific examples, but I will say that the typical way that you build an IoT platform is you collect every telemetry event and you put it into cold storage and you have it forever. What that allows you to do is I can then slap an instance of Tableau or Power BI on top of that, give it to my data engineers, my data scientists, the business units, and they can go through and they can find their own insights that we can then go back and encode into the software solution. So if you really think about that IoT, that you're collecting that data from those devices, you're putting it into a lot of different databases, and that information is being shot out through just straight up data visualization and data analysis. And then once you've sort of hit on something, then you encode it into a mobile application or a web-based application for that person who's most interested in that analysis.
Yeah. So I can actually give you a practical example. I worked on a project, it's probably almost a decade ago. It was a company they wanted to measure, they were doing energy management software. And for a restaurant, the air conditioning is a significant bill. You know, kitchen is constantly venting heat and gases and recooling air. So they just wanted to measure the energy used by the air conditioning unit. Well, they started to realize that as they were measuring the current usage, every time the compressor would kick on, they were measuring it. They noticed over time the inrush current is the bearings wear down. You need a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. And they knew once it reached a certain threshold, that compressor was going to die within 60 days. So if you've ever had your AC go out, if you could know 60 days in advance and shop around for the best price, that would be awesome. So from that, they also took and figured out, well, as we mine the data a little bit more, we can actually tell that this system is turning on more often than not based on the humidity and temperature conditions. In fact, we can estimate it's down 7% less on refrigerant, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's almost 25% reduction in heat efficiency. So as they went through it, they iterated 4 different ways, and then they not only gave that energy management data, they were selling it to the HVAC guys to say, hey, you've got these yearly contracts. Wouldn't it be nice to know that you can just walk in, know everything is good, and walk out and collect your yearly check, right? Versus, hey, I know this one's going to die. Let me send out the guy in advance during their off-business hours and solve it. So again, it's a nice customer retention tool as well. So when you gather all the data, you never know what sort of extra business insights you're going to get and be able to monetize them.
How many people in the audience are spending a lot of time in the data analytics and the predictive analytics space? Yeah, and I did a panel at the largest data center event show in the United States a couple weeks ago. And one of the biggest comments were these data center owners are scared to death because of the amount of data that we're giving them from the IoT space and are not being utilized. So they're having to store, like you said, a majority of this data that's coming out of there, but they're only using like 10% of it. And so they're concerned about that, but they're also getting into edge computing in a big way because they feel that that's the way they can make money long term is by being able to control the edge computing side of IoT and then sending it into their back-end data center. So it's an interesting concept of where that is. So back to end-to-end solutions. So what's the biggest challenge in deploying an end-to-end solution today?
There's just so many. Because there's just so many integration points, right? And then there's to your point about the education, because these things are expensive, right? At the end of the day, if you're taking this all the way to scale, you're spending millions and millions of dollars. You can get in to the market, do a proof of concept for like $500,000 or something like that, but they're very expensive and things can go wrong, and there's a lot of different players. There isn't really one house that's gonna have all of the components you need to build an IoT solution. We don't do hardware. You guys don't do software. You guys have the devices, you know, the dispensers in the business case, but you don't have the in-house staff. It spreads out so wide, right? From a technical perspective, I can tell you that setup is the biggest, most challenging thing. But there's so many other places that it can go wrong.
Yeah, same thing. It's those, 8 to 12 dimensions we were talking about earlier, right? So all those things have to work in unison, and all those things require staff, and there's a stack associated with those, whether it's hardware, software, or both. and they have to be maintained and change managed and governed and blah, 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 blah. So I think program management as a whole, and we typically forget, we fall in love with technology. I'm a geek at heart. I can talk about technology all day long, but we forget about change management, right? And it's just basic stuff, but this is another technology program that when it's scaled and it starts touching customers in real life, and you start collecting money, it becomes a real production level platform. And sometimes we forget about that. We get consumed by the technology, shiny objects, and the magic of the MVP, right? And then when it's time to scale, that's when most pilots fail or get stalled. So it's that leap of transitioning something from the MVP experimentation stage, great, got it, I think we can make money with this, to the next level, that's a lot of work, and it's not trivial.
Yeah, the biggest thing, I'll just tag on to that, the first production deployment goes really well, and you're like, yay, we deployed 200 units, we're getting this data, and then the executives go, we need to scale fast. And then the second, third one, you ship junk and you had problems you didn't discover, and all of a sudden you just tanked your reputation, you tanked the business case, and you're at fault because you agreed to ramp without discipline. So, don't let the excitement of the first deployment and the success make you make a bad decision. Be disciplined in your deployment approach and plan for what you're going to do if it fails, so you can recover.
Yeah, to me, it's a great example of amazing complex system, right? Especially on the integration testing side, you have to test so many things. You have to go to alpha, and you have to go to multiple locations, and you have to test real-world connectivity issues, and you have to simulate things, test, and integrate all these things. And at the same time, you may be changing firmware or getting an update on the hardware piece or the sensors or the cloud or whatever. So I think it's a very complex environment, and it deserves a program level management and change management type approach.
And I think one of the biggest challenges are how many people within an organization are involved in an end-to-end IoT solution. Between IT, OT, and you said cybersecurity is a huge aspect of it. Sometimes we have the sustainability people that are involved. So now you become a humanistic approach manager when it comes to IoT, as well as technology-wise.
Well, and the thing that's not really an issue right now, but is going to be an issue, is the legal process that's going to go into this with data collection rules and all that stuff. If you're talking about doing a global deployment, you have to have the ability built into your platform to stand it up in different places very quickly. Now, if you're doing a good job, you should be able to do that anyway, because you have your dev, staging, and production environment, that you should just be able to do the same thing and replicate into a different location, and you just hook that all back up to a global provider depending on what you're allowed to do. But that's going to get increasingly tricky. I mean, even in the United States, we have different laws state to state for the way that data can be collected. It's only going to get trickier.
And I think when you look at AWS and Microsoft and some of the other larger platform cloud providers, they're all trying to figure out what their space is and what their place is within the security aspect of it and controlling of that data. And I don't think they have all the answers yet.
But I wouldn't bet on anyone else, though. And you know what I mean? If you're talking about using different components, because an IoT solution is built of so many different components, and so many of those you could build yourself if you wanted to. But there's no value in doing that because you will never be able to catch up to, say, Azure's IoT Hub, for example. It's not worthwhile to go in that direction. And then when you start having to worry about different regional rules, having to build those into your own platform, you're going to be just chasing that the entire time.
2 rapid-fire questions to kind of get to the end of this a little bit. Blockchain and IoT, do we care? Is it here? Is it going to be?
I still don't know what blockchain's for. I don't.
Mr. Anonymous, that was your question, okay? You feel better now?
I don't have time to look at blockchain.
Okay, it's in the supply chain. Are you working with blockchain at all on the supply chain side?
Yes, we are, but it's still in the pilot, still in the pilot stage. So
You must have
not
been
deployed.
answered. You asked that question, sir?
Yeah. So sort of stepping back from what we serve our customers internally, obviously we convert material to products. And each step of the way, there's inspections and processing customs and, tariff codes. Make sure you know the country of origin so you get it appropriately. So there's a lot of interest in that, at least in our industry.
5G and IoT. Start with you, Sean.
Everybody asks me about 5G, and then I talk about what the potential module costs are, and they drop the question.
The future will be awesome.
The cellular technology are too expensive to have any sort of scale, even if it's NB-IoT. I don't know. It's a ways off.
Hell no. I just don't see it anytime soon until the autonomous vehicles are there and the carriers have built it out sufficiently. How many people were up last week in Peachtree Corners at the lab and saw what Sprint is doing with the 5G and the autonomous vehicles? Very impressive stuff, but we ain't going to see it soon. Anytime soon. I think it's going to take a long time to get to that point, and I think you're right. The module costs right now for 5G coming out of China from QuickTel and some of the other ones that are out there are just too expensive to be able to look at anything other than connected car and putting in those kind of programs. So I don't see it. Even though all my clients in China and India are using 5G today on a lot of IoT-related products and offerings, it is not prevalent, and I don't see it here for quite a while.
And I feel like most of the answers to these questions it depends, right? It depends. What's IoT for you? For me, it's the Internet of Things, which in of itself is funny because we haven't connected anything but machines or things, right? Anyway,
Well, that's why I want to go back to machine to machine. It should be M to M.
So Internet of Things, but also intelligence of things, right? So those two things, and there's enough there to do. And to me, it's always IoT and something else, right? It's not just IoT in isolation. And for us is understanding our place in the case of the smart dispenser and the smart washroom, if you will, inside a smart building, right? And that smart building inside smart city. And then it starts getting interesting because you have this interplay of multiple data streams. And then to me, the most interesting IoT business use cases happen when you start getting at the edge of one ecosystem and the other. And you start sort of mixing what for me is exhaust data. I can monetize it possibly. But if I can switch with another partner that can absolutely leverage that data and they can give me something that they don't make money off, but I can make money off. To me, those are the partnerships of the future in terms of the IoT space. But sometimes we get consumed with let's make money now with this one or two use cases. But the future is I think it's brilliant if you look at it in that perspective.
I was going to say that the whole partner concept, right? There are plenty of companies. You guys are in the washroom, right? That's where you guys live, okay? But you guys don't make toilets, and you don't make you don't make faucets and all that type of stuff, and you can make the argument that it's probably not worth the investment as a toilet maker to make an internet-connected toilet, because sure, you could do some cool things with just the toilet, but getting the entire office building connected so that your toilet can connect to that network, and I know it's the toilet thing that's getting you. All right, I'll use a different one. But the idea is that if you have a really good business case and you get into some environment first, whether that's the nursery, the washroom, the home, whatever it happens to be, and you can have that solution that makes enough money that you can afford the connectivity cost. You can have the gateway that you own, that your devices connect to initially, that connects to the internet. If you get that, then you can bring in these partners who have maybe smaller budget IoT solutions, and they're effectively using your gateway as their network in the same way that a company would buy space in a phone line. And that's actually a really powerful thing that a lot of the bigger companies are going after right now is how do I become the owner of this area and own the network connectivity and become the hub, that ecosystem, or I'm the one that gets to be processed. I get to process and move that data around.
For an end-to-end solution to be successful, there's obviously a lot of moving parts and a lot of different vendors and a lot of different partners, from carriers to hardware providers to module manufacturers to software providers and developers and cloud-based guys, and the 700 platforms that are out there to choose from, besides yours. Is it becoming so difficult that a small, medium-sized business is going to have a very difficult time trying to deploy an IoT solution, and only the larger corporations can have B2B solutions that are going to be justifiable Or what do you do if you're a small, medium-sized business and you think you have something that IoT can help you with?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is there are those 700 different platform providers, right? And you know what I mean? You don't have to necessarily have a $100 million business out of the gate. If you have a good idea and you can leverage some of those platforms. If you think about the typical platform, it's someone selling you a custom chip that automatically connects to their custom cloud for which you can then grab the data from, right? Like that piece of the puzzle is something you can kind of get off the shelf, and it's expensive, and as you scale up, it's extremely expensive, but you can get to market with that. And I think there's enough of those players right now there's so many of them that they're actually so hungry for business, I would imagine, that they would give you it for free. But I think you can definitely get in right now as a small, medium business.
Yeah, I would say the same is for those, take something that's off the shelf, start there. If you really scale, it's really easy to do the spreadsheet to figure out what the costs are for the device.
And you'll have the money to do it.
And if you'll have the money to do it, and you'll have proven it. So, again, when you get to that point, call me.
I was just going to say there's a cost of waiting. So you can say I'm small, it's complicated, there are 700 vendors. But for any kind of business, the sooner you start collecting data in some fashion, the better informed you'll be about that opportunity space. If you keep waiting, it's going to be increasingly hard. And then once you have that data, you can go back and be ahead of the competition, even if you didn't know exactly what you were doing, and even if you didn't fine-tune the number of sensors and where and how many, you'll be ahead, right? And I think that's one of the keys to be successful in this space.
Okay. And now for my last trick question of the night. How many people have heard me do panels before? So you know this question's coming. So if Steve Brummer were to give you a sizable investment and you were trying to find a spot for it within the IoT industry, what would you do with my money? What hole would you plug within the industry? Where do you think that ROI can come? Because I want 15%, 25% of my money back in a couple of years. So where would you put my money today in the IoT space?
This is the boring answer because I'm already doing this, which is growing stable kernel, right? I'm a big believer in the whole. Is that the only thing you would do? I'm a one-track person. I got one thing in my mind, okay? I go to work and then I go home, and then I go to work and then I go home. I imagine similar for many of you. But for me, I would just be investing more in our company, more in our sales, more in our engineering department, because there's so much opportunity. If you're the type of in our UX department, sorry.
For software development and software in
Yeah,
general?
because I think, we're going to nail, I think, at some point, the connectivity, the hardware piece of it. I think we're going to make it more of a commodity. And I think really it's the use cases that come out of that connected device, coming up with those and doing the research. Like we have a market research division that does that. It figures out, okay, you're this company, you have these products, these are your customers, how do you make money with IoT? And then we go and build that solution. So I just want to scale that because I think that's where there's a ton of opportunity, or at least I'm betting there's a ton of opportunity.
Mariano, take my money and do what with it?
Yeah, but you didn't say how much money. So what's
$10 million.
What's sizable for you, right?
How many of you met
Kidding.
my wife?
I would give you a trick answer to that question. I'll say I would take 95% of that money and I will invest it in upfront research of the right kind to narrow down one human truth about my customers. What situation can I solve with this technology where they are stuck and I can help them get unstuck? And then I'll spend 5% on actually calculating and constructing the solution.
I'd probably have a little bit more practical one. So previous to joining Creation, I worked for a small startup company. We did 3D image reconstruction. So, take a Microsoft Connect, go around a room, capture it, create an AutoCAD file. Well, if you extend that even beyond, and you started to take not just security video, but 3D video, and learn behavioral analytics, security applications, I would pour a ton of R&D just into that application. I think the insights from that will be unbelievable. So that would be where I'd put it.
Excellent. And I get to answer my own question because it's my money. I think one of the biggest missing pieces of the end-to-end solution world within IoT for the next foreseeable future is our lack of a single throat to choke from someone. And I would start a systems integration firm that handles this in a very smooth, easy manner. There is just so many challenges and issues that have to get addressed. It's not a strategy advisory consulting firm like me. It's not AT&T or some of the major carriers, even though there are carriers in the room probably that are going to start throwing stuff at me. It's, you know, who is that company that is going to be able to understand the end-to-end solution and provide that for the customer? So we're going to split the investment?
I mean, I was just going to go to the beach with it. I thought
You
that'd be
know,
a good idea.
I will tell you that I was doing a panel about a year ago, and there was a woman on the panel that knows me and my wife, and she said, "Oh, Steve, that's easy. I'd go shopping with your wife." I'm like, "Oh, great. That's where it's going to ROI on my money. That's awesome." So with that, we're done. Thank you so much. Hopefully this was educational and you got something out of it. We'll be around for a little while, but thank you very much. Thank you for the questions, all you anonymous people. And anything else I need to know about Abby or say anything, or am I handing that over to you? Is there any door prizes for any of these people?
Thank you for the speakers. Let's have a round of applause. Thank you all for sharing your time and your expertise with us. Great panel, great insights. I just want, we have a small thank you gift for all of you.
Oh, I was
So-
looking for a door prize for them, not for us.
Sorry,
IoT
no
sensor?
prizes. We are an entirely volunteer-run organization, and our budget stretches to food and wine and beer. So we all get double our salary, which is 0 right now. So thank you all for coming. Come back and see us in October.